whispers of Runeterra.
To name them is not enough, because the most powerful forces in Runeterra are not the ones you hear about, but the ones working in silence, shaping empires long before a single blade is drawn. Welcome, Summoner. You've heard the names. Swain, the visionary who seized Noxus. Zed, who shattered an ancient order. The chaos of Zorn. But these are only symptoms, not causes. Behind every coup lies something older, something patient. The unseen hand of the Black Rose, where LeBlanc wears 1,000 faces. The fractured teachings of the Kinku, where balance quietly gave way to something far more ruthless. The slow, suffocating grip of chem barons and hidden syndicates turning desperation into power. In Runeterra, history moves on two tracks. The fast stories of war and conquest you already know, and the slow, buried current where secrets wait decades to take effect. Where a single idea, whispered in the dark, can outlive kingdoms and still claim its first victim generations later. That is where we will linger. Not on the moment a life ends, but on the years that made it inevitable. Not on the explosion, but on the quiet decisions, the hidden bargains, the unseen hands that ensured it would happen at all. So let the details drift past you like ash, because beneath them is something far more unsettling. The realization that the true architects of Runeterra's darkness are not the ones who strike, but the ones who never need to. How we'll walk the shadows, a guided tour of hidden powers. So we must be deliberate, you and I. If we are to take each order by the throat of its history, we cannot simply tear at every shadow at once. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you would drown in names and sigils and whispered passwords. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. What matters is the pattern of the fire that made them. We will begin in Noxus, in a room that doesn't officially exist. Picture a candlelit salon behind velvet curtains, the air heavy with wine and old incense, where senators speak softly while a pale woman listens and does not age. On the walls, portraits rearrange themselves with each regime, yet one symbol never leaves: the Black Rose. Here, history is rewritten as calmly as a letter, and you will feel the seduction of control, the belief that if you pull the right thread, war itself will bow. From there, we descend. The candles give way to sputtering chem lamps in Zorn, to a laboratory that hums like a trapped hive. Glass vats glow sickly green, tubes shiver with pressurized vapors, and somewhere a chem baron signs a contract that will poison a district for a generation. Above, Piltover pretends the ledger is clean. Below, clandestine cabals and syndicates test weapons on the forgotten. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after the decision to use it has already been made. Then we cross the sea to Ionia, to a moonlit shrine where the wind moves but the trees do not, and shadows drag themselves a heartbeat behind their owners. The Kinku, the Order of Shadow, and those who broke from them gather in courtyards that smell of incense and blood. Once they swore to guard balance. Now, some turn that vow into assassination, others into rigid law. You will watch the slow corruption of ideals, the moment when an order looks into the mirror and sees the enemy it once hunted. After that come the deeper wrongnesses, hidden circles that kneel before the void, hands pressed to relics that whisper in languages older than land. In Demacia, mage hunters pass down secret ledgers of names. In Shurima, sun disk loyalists plot beneath ruined stone. On Targon, star scribes trace constellations that record every bargain made under their light. Allow the night to grow a little deeper as we meet spirits that remember broken oaths and artifacts that refuse to forget the hands that held them. Champions, battles, bright ultimates on a familiar rift. But we will be following a different line. Who decides who suffers, who rises, who is gently erased from the tale before it is ever told? You do not need to memorize every symbol or secret name. Hold only this thread, that behind each war, each brother's fall, each ruined city, there was an organization choosing the outcome long before the first blade was drawn. How to listen to secrets. Your thread through the labyrinth. So how do you walk into this maze without losing yourself on the first turn? In a world as wide as Runeterra, there are too many doors, too many passwords, too many robed figures, whispering in too many half-lit rooms. If you try to clutch every name, every date, every forgotten title, the story will slip away from you like wind through open fingers. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A forgotten chem baron here, a minor Noxian general there, some obscure circle of star scribes in a Targonian archive, whose sigil you will not remember tomorrow. You do not need them. What you need is the pattern, power hiding itself, then explaining why it must be hidden, then insisting that you should be grateful for the concealment. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. This is the thread you will follow. First, there is fear of chaos. Noxus terrified of weakness, Piltover afraid of collapse, Ionia dreading spiritual ruin, Demacia haunted by magic it cannot name. From that fear comes control, cabals, orders, secret courts, chem baron councils tightening their grip. Control hardens into cruelty, and cruelty learns to dress itself in noble words: protection, balance, progress, purity. Finally, there is the breaking point, when reality refuses to stay buried, and the land itself begins to spit out what was forced beneath it. Think of the Black Rose rewriting Noxian history, of LeBlanc wearing emperors-like masks while telling the crowd she guards the Empire's destiny. Think of Zon's Chembarons, feeding whole districts to addiction in the name of innovation. Think of the King Ku and the Order of Shadow, brothers in teaching once, now divided into guardians and assassins, both claiming they alone preserve Ionia's balance. Different banners, same curve of the story. So listen lightly. Do not strain. When you hear of an order that claims to protect something, order in Noxus, balance in Ionia, progress in Piltover, purity in Demacia, ask one soft question. What price is being quietly paid, and by whom? Champions on a battlefield, a war of blades and light. But while the rift screams, there are hands in libraries, catacombs, laboratories, all turning the wheel in silence. We will call this Runeterra, after dark, the hours when official histories sleep and the real machinery hums to life. To understand any single secret order, we must first step back, feel the whole land under our feet, and watch how each hidden circle tries and fails to hold the world in its preferred shape. Our next step is outward, not inward. Before we descend into particular crypts and councils, we must see the vast, restless world they are so desperate to command. The world as a scarred map, Runeterra's long memory of conspiracy. So let us lift our eyes now, as if you and I were leaning over a war table in a darkened room, and see Runeterra not as a clean atlas of borders and banners, but as a wounded hide stretched flat, every line a scar, every sea a burn that never quite cooled. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. What you call a frontier is often just the latest ink, laid trembling over older marks that someone tried very hard to erase. In a world as wide as this, Noxus looks at first like a simple story, an empire of strength, iron discipline, and relentless war. Yet, if you trace its history with your fingertip, you feel the ridges where coups rose and fell, where cabals like the Black Rose scraped away one narrative and wrote another, backing Borum Darkwill in one century, arranging his fall in the next, placing LeBlanc's many faces behind curtains where no sun reaches. Noxus is a palimpsest of brothers and rivals, of generals who thought they commanded legions when, in truth, they were already marching in someone else's script. Demacia, by contrast, stands on the map like a fortress of certainty, pale stone thrust up against the dark. Yet that stone was quarried from fear, fear of magic, fear of spirits, fear of what ungoverned power might do after nightfall. Its mage hunters and hidden informants form their own quiet lattice beneath the law, correcting what the law refuses to see, turning love of order into a net that catches the wrong throats. You think you know this story, do you not, when you read of a shining kingdom? The land remembers each purge as a kind of prayer uttered in reverse. Further south, Shurima returns from the grave, its sun disk raised, its emperors resurrected as if history itself could be commanded to kneel. But it only appears sudden. Loyalists never stopped plotting under foreign rule, hoarding relics, rehearsing hymns in cellars while the desert wind screamed above. Every uprising there is tied to an older vow, to some forgotten priest or general who chose empire over mercy and taught their descendants to finish what was begun. And to the west, Targon does not merely sit upon the map, it impales it. A mountain of living prophecy, its star scribes and hidden cults bend mortal lives to celestial designs that few below can name. Official temples speak of destiny. Unseen circles calculate which soul will be broken next in the name of that word. So no tragedy is isolated. Every war, purge and uprising is the echo of an earlier choice, made by men and women who believed they were preserving honor, securing a safer dawn, or simply surviving one more night. When law grows too rigid, when faith drifts into abstraction, when war becomes constant weather, shadows step in to correct what they call imbalance. Chem barons in Zon rewriting the price of breath, void cults from Freljord to Shurima inviting an older hunger to redraw the horizon. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, and let the details move past you like drifting ash. If the Black Rose can excise whole rulers from Noxian memory, if Demacia can bury mages and call it virtue, if Targon can name madness prophecy, then how reliable is the map beneath your hand? What if the borders you trust, the legends you repeat, are already edited outcomes of conspiracies that succeeded too completely to be seen? Hold that doubt, because the next doors we open belong to those editors of reality themselves, and some of them are still writing. Where worlds touch, Ionia, and the rules of hidden balance. So let us step now onto a different kind of battlefield. Allow the night to grow a little deeper until borders and maps fade, and what remains beneath your feet is not a nation, but a listening presence. In a world as wide as Runeterra, there are places where the editors of reality do not sit in courts or councils, but in the quiet between one breath and the next. Ionia is one of those places. It is not a country. It is a conversation. Every tree, river and stone speaks, and every passing human thought is an interruption in that endless dialogue between root and river, shrine and shadow, mortal breath and the spirit that leans close to hear. You can walk through an Ionian valley and think you are alone, yet the land is already revising you, already writing your smallest gesture as a line in a story you will never fully read. Here the boundary between worlds is thin enough to bruise. A blade stroke drawn in anger does not end at the ribcage. It becomes a scar in the spirit lands, a pale seam that spirits trace like old ink. A whispered vow in a mountain shrine echoes as a binding contract, its words still hanging in the ether long after the mortal tongue forgets. A forgotten grave on a hillside is not forgotten at all, but a bright wound in the unseen, pulsing each night like a lantern no one lit. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A village that feels watched is not merely superstitious, it is watched by patient eyes in the rafters and in the wells, by spirits weighing every unkindness and every kindness with the same meticulous care. A forest where an oath was broken does not simply grow wild. Its trunks twist subtly toward the offender's house. Its roots heave stones out of old paths. Its wind carries back the exact words of betrayal to anyone who dares listen. There is a shrine, half collapsed, where the air still tastes of old incense and unspoken regret. No one goes there after nightfall. Children say that if you kneel, you will feel a hand on your back, urging you lower, demanding the apology no one ever gave. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. In Ionia, even rumours have roots. Ionian spiritual orders do not treat this as myth. For them, these are rules as concrete as gravity and as unforgiving as war. Imbalance draws attention. A single act of cruelty may pass, but repeated cruelty stains a place, thickening the air until even ordinary wind feels reluctant to cross it. Certain rituals can redirect these stains, can bind them to tokens, can conceal them beneath layers of incense and mantra, but only for a time, only at a cost. Monks in peaceful temples, assassins in black, all speaking of balance as if it were a gentle, mutual truce. Yet in a land where spirits remember everything, the temptation to quietly correct reality becomes overwhelming. If a massacre leaves a wound in the ether, why not erase the memory? If a leader's shame threatens the village, why not bury that shame where only spirits can see? This is the soil from which the Kinku and the Order of Shadow grow, one sworn to maintain the equilibrium of seen and unseen, the other willing to weaponize the same rules in the name of survival. Between them lies a question that will not sleep. When you can edit the past and redirect the consequences of sin, at what point does guardianship become horror? We will have to follow their blades into the dark to find out. Stains that never fade, recasting balance as cosmic horror. We will have to follow their blades into the dark to find out, but before steel meets flesh, you must understand the page on which those cuts are written. Listen to the wind move through rice paddies and ruined shrines, and know that every stalk, every stone, every quiet pool is keeping score. Humans forget. They must. A war ends, brothers bury brothers, a village rebuilds with new paint over old scorch marks, and within a generation, the tale is only a story told around a brazier on a winter night. The land does not share this mercy. In a world as wide as Runeterra, Ionia is one of the few places where soil, river and spirit remember perfectly, and their remembrance is not gentle. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Think of atrocity as ink. A massacre in a mountain monastery, an assassination in a tea house, a single child left to drown so a prophecy can be fulfilled. Each act is a dark spill that seeps down into the grain of reality. You can sand the floorboards, you can rebuild the temple, you can plant new bamboo over the mass grave. Yet beneath the polished surface the blot remains, a shadow trapped in the fibres of the world, visible to every passing spirit who cares to look. This is what Ionia calls balance. Not the absence of stain, but an endless curatorship of what may be seen. The Kinku, the Order of Shadow, the nameless gardeners of haunted groves, and the masked attendants of forgotten shrines are less guardians of peace than editors of a ledger that can never be erased. Their rituals do not remove the ink. They only decide which lines are underlined with incense and confession, and which are buried beneath chants, silences, and carefully arranged lies. Secret orders preventing chaos, assassins striking to avert greater wars, monks accepting necessary sins for the good of the land. Yet in Ionia, a single village erased in the night is not an event that passes. It is an eternal entry in the spirit realm's account books. Every throat cut in a back alley, every heretic drowned in a moonlit pond becomes a debt recorded in a hand that never tires. The horror here is quiet because it has all the time in the world to wait for collection. So when Noxian legions arrive, they are not stepping onto blank parchment. Their engines, their chemfire, their measured cruelty are writing new jagged lines across a page already swollen with unhealed wounds. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A Black Rose agent whispering which shrine to burn first. A Kinku master choosing which battlefield to ignore. A Shadow Order deciding which massacre must be allowed and so another may be hidden. Somewhere the ledger tips. Somewhere the land decides that remembering is no longer enough. And what wakes to balance those stains will not care who thought themselves the author of this war. When steel meets spirit, Noxus arrives in Ionia. So when the ships finally come, they do not arrive as monsters from legend, but as geometry. Black iron hulls cutting a straight line through a curved sea, ramming themselves up onto pale Ionian sand that once only knew fishing boats and funeral lanterns. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. You watch them disembark in ranks. Shield, spear, engine. The Noxian formations move as if the land were a flat board, not a living conversation of root and spirit and forgotten oath. Heavy tread flattens dune grass that used to sway with the wind from distant shrines. Artillery is hauled ashore on groaning wheels, each spiked black circle cutting deep, uncaring furrows into a beach that once remembered children's footprints and the soft drag of prayer mats. To Noxus, this is territory. Height for ballistae, forest for lumber, rivers for supply lines. They map Ionia in measurements and angles, in fields of fire and arcs of bombardment. But to the land, each trench is a wound. Each fortification hammered into a hillside is a nail in living bone. Spirits who once traced the gentle lines of rice paddies now recoil from the straight, brutal geometry of siege works. In a world as wide as Runeterra, war is always cartography. The question is whether you draw lines on parchment or into the flesh of a place. For Ionian secret orders, the first shells are not just explosions, They are revelations. A temple wall that once echoed with mantras shudders under iron shot, and the old slow rituals of correction, 3 nights of incense, 7 cycles of chant, a careful negotiation with offended spirits, simply cannot keep pace with artillery that can erase a village between one breath and the next. How do you balance a land when the desecration is measured in volleys, not generations? Kinku scouts slip through smoke and shattered bamboo, counting machines instead of omens, while the Order of Shadow watches occupation patterns the way they once watched constellations. Their debates turn sharp. Preserve the old ways, strike only where the spirit world demands, or adapt, weaponize shadow and fear, and become something the invaders cannot predict. Noble monks, brutal legionnaires, a simple clash of honour and conquest. Behind the Noxian banners, other hands have been arranging pieces for years. The Black Rose, older than the Empire it wears like a mask, has whispered in the ears of generals and tyrants, guided the rise and fall of Borum Darkwill, and tuned Noxus toward conflicts precisely like this. Not merely for land, but for what war does to memory, to magic, to the boundaries between worlds. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A Keem Baron funding an experimental siege engine. A hidden cabal testing how many spirits can be torn from a single grove. When war erupts, it is rarely a surprise to those who never set foot on the battlefield. It is the moment a long pressure finally splits stone. On Runeterra, the first scream is often just the last line of a plan written in secret ink. The Rose That Never Withers. Origins of the Black Rose. So when you hear of empires rising and falling, of generals crowned and executed, let the details move past you like drifting ash and ask instead, who was close enough to whisper in their ear? In a world as wide as Runeterra, the most enduring crowns are the ones no sculptor ever carves, worn by those who stand just behind the throne, half in torchlight, half in night. The Black Rose is not born with Noxus. It survives into Noxus. Before the Crimson Banners, there were older banners. Older wars, older cities ground to sand. Among the ruins, a shifting circle of mages, dispossessed nobles, and survivors of dead empires came to the same cold conclusion. The blade that takes the crown also paints a target on the brow. Ruling from shadows is safer than ruling from a gilded chair. The horror here is quiet, like a verdict reached in a locked room and carried out by other hands. They chose a symbol, a rose that never wilts. At first it seems gentle, almost tender. A promise that beauty and memory can outlast the rot of time. Look longer and you see the threat. For a flower to remain perfect, something must be taken from it. Its growth, its decay, its honest surrender to the soil. History under their care is treated the same way. Preserved and pruned, cut back where it grows wild, forced to bloom in the shape they require. Every dynasty is a stem. Every rebellion is a thorn clipped before it draws too much blood. Their belief is simple and therefore terrible. Power must be concentrated in the hands of those who understand the long game. If the land must be lied to, so be it. If whole populations must be sacrificed, so be it. If a war in the Freljord must be delayed, or a Shuriman relic quietly misplaced so that some future design may ripen, then those are acceptable offerings on an altar no common spirit will ever see. You think you know this story, do you not? Because you have read of emperors and grand generals? They are, to the Black Rose, pieces on a board that stretches across centuries. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, and you will find them in every era, never the same faces, yet always the same presence. An advisor who counsels patience when the Senate howls for conquest. A lover who convinces a tyrant to trust the wrong brother. A court magician who discovers a new spell at the exact moment a rival must fall. An anonymous benefactor funding Borum Darkwill's rise, then orchestrating his fall with equal composure. They stand near the wind of history without ever seeming to be its source. At the centre, or perhaps at the edges, is LeBlanc. She is a person, yes, with a voice that has condemned cities and comforted orphans. But she is also a role, a mask passed like a candle flame from one shadow to the next. Some say she walked the halls of ancient empires before Noxus had a name. Others insist there have been many LeBlancs, each wearing the same smile, each remembering more than a single human life should hold. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A senator's confidant, a baron's secret tutor, a nameless woman in a crowd who looks uncannily like a queen from a forgotten mural. If LeBlanc is both one and many, then what exactly is the Black Rose? A cabal of followers, or a single will reflected through 1,000 faces? And if they have shaped Noxus from the shadows, whom are they quietly grooming next? LeBlanc's many faces. One woman, 100 histories. So let us follow one of those faces, just one, as it slips from the crowd and walks into history. Allow the night to grow a little deeper around you. Imagine a torchlit hall in early Noxus, banners stiff in the stale wind as an aging general signs a decree that will send thousands to war. His hand trembles. His voice does not. Years later, a hidden archive will note that this was the moment an empire chose conquest over consolidation. It will not note that the general was LeBlanc. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you expect many authors for such a story. Yet when you look closely, the signatures begin to rhyme. A beloved consort who urges a timid lord toward bloodshed. A foreign envoy whose whispered counsel derails a fragile peace. An enemy spy whose capture justifies a purge the High Command secretly desired. Different names, different portraits, different blades raised in triumph or in terror. Yet behind the eyes, the same undying spirit, wearing each life like a mask that will be burned once the play is done. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. To live as LeBlanc is to be divided on purpose. She is the queen and the handmaiden, the traitor and the loyalist, the grieving widow and the assassin who made her so. Where, in that hall of mirrors, does a single self stand? When you have rehearsed 1,000 griefs, 1,000 ambitions, 1,000 deaths, do your own desires not thin to a faint echo? A simple sorceress, a villain in purple silk. But imagine waking each morning unsure which remembered childhood is actually yours. Her illusions are not the bright, brittle tricks you see on the rift. They are instruments of governance. A king addresses his legions, promising glory. The soldiers cheer, the scribes record. The land itself seems to lean toward a new fate. Yet the flesh beneath the crown is LeBlanc's, and the real monarch lies drugged 3 rooms away. A treaty is signed by a councillor who never existed before that night and will never be seen again. Yet the ink is binding. The borders shift, and maps across Valoran are quietly redrawn to match a phantom's hand. Consider Borum Darkwill. An old man gnawed by fear of death, suddenly flooded with occult certainty that Noxus must devour the world, or be devoured. Behind him, in private councils and candlelit chambers, a pale advisor who is always present yet rarely named. She feeds his dread. She sharpens it into doctrine. When his madness begins to endanger the Black Rose's longer designs, that same presence leans toward a different general, a man with a ruined arm and a raven's patience. Swain's coup feels like a soldier's revolt, a mortal correction, but in the shadows, the same undying woman rearranges the pieces, content to trade one mask for another. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A speech, a signature, a coronation, a quiet assassination on a balcony where the wind carries away the last protest. How many of these moments, enshrined as Noxian destiny, were simply LeBlanc choosing which version of the empire pleased her and her order most? If one woman can be 100 rulers, 100 traitors, 100 martyrs, then how much of Noxus's proud chronicle is truly a chorus? And how much is a solo, sung in different voices, while the real power waits behind the curtain for the next scene to begin? Rewriting an empire. The Black Rose and Noxus's false memory. Noxus, the brutal meritocracy, rising through sheer discipline and the iron will of its generals, as if history itself were a straight blade drawn in daylight. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, and you begin to see the palimpsest beneath the ink, the older script of a cabal that predates the empire it claims to serve. Borum Darkwill is the first stain you must look at closely. Officially, he is the tyrant whose excesses justified a necessary coup, a mad ruler whose hunger for immortality dragged Noxus toward ruin. Yet in the hidden records, in whispers traded between spirits of forgotten archivists, you find that the Black Rose placed him there, nurtured his paranoia, fed his appetites with promises of chem alchemy and blood rituals. They inflated his power, then orchestrated his fall, so that when Swain's ravens circled the palace, the people were already rehearsing the lines of gratitude they had been taught to speak. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Darkwill's worst decrees are not simply remembered, they are curated. Pamphlets appear in soldiers' barracks describing his failures with theatrical detail. Anonymous testimonies circulate in taverns, all bearing the same careful phrasing. When Swain rises, the story has already been written. The visionary general, wronged by a decaying despot, returning from exile with the blessing of the masses and the supposed spirit of Noxian strength at his back. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and notice what is missing. Rivals who opposed both Darkwill and Swain do not merely die, they vanish between lines. A senator whose speeches questioned unexplained disappearances is recalled from the chronicles as if she never served. A war hero, once celebrated in murals, is quietly reattributed, his victories reassigned to more convenient names. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you expect some records to be lost to war and time, but this is different. This is subtraction with intention, absence as design. The Black Rose does not rush. They will support a doomed campaign, back a failing general, or allow a decade of apparent stagnation if it bends the long arc of the Empire toward their preferred horizon. Sometimes they let Noxus bleed in foreign lands so that domestic fear ripens into the precise appetite they require. For stronger rulers, harsher laws, deeper secrets. Sometimes they let a popular movement swell from below, only to reveal years later that its slogans were written in a private chamber beneath a shuttered theatre. Propaganda, forged decrees, staged riots that erupt exactly where hidden scribes have seeded rumours for months. These are their instruments. A war is declared and only afterward are speeches composed that make it feel inevitable. An alliance is betrayed, and retroactive revelations about ancient enmity appear in freshly copied histories. The horror here is not simply that they choose, it is that they choose first, and then manufacture the reasons you will swear were always there. Once you accept that Noxus has already been rewritten, the doubt spreads like smoke. If one empire's proud chronicle can be rearranged so thoroughly, how many wars were never as righteous as they seemed? How many betrayals were staged? How many natural uprisings were quietly paid for in advance? Runeterra After Dark is not a map of nations, but of narratives, crossing and strangling each other. And when you finally understand that every official record may be only the victory of one secret story over another, you're left with a harder question than who rules. You must ask whether truth itself has a homeland in this land at war with its own memory. Pawns and profits. Swain's bargain with the hidden. So when you hear that truth may have no homeland, you must ask the next darker question. What kind of man dares to rule in that exile? Let the details move past you like drifting ash. In the distance, the torches of Noxus burn in disciplined lines, and somewhere within that blaze sits a one-armed general who once crawled through a different kind of fire and did not come back alone. Swain, the tactician. Swain, the visionary. But before the Ravens and the Crimson Throne, there was a field of corpses on the Ionian front, a failed campaign, a shattered leg, a blade of imperial reputation snapped under the weight of its own miscalculation. He fell there in disgrace, abandoned to the carrion and the wind, until something in the dark beneath that war-torn land looked back at him and decided he would stand again. The horror here is quiet, like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder while you sign a decree you believe you wrote alone. Swain rose from that battlefield with eyes that did not quite belong to him, with ravens that were not merely birds, but instruments, threads in a wider web. He returned to Noxus, stripped of rank, yet armed with visions that cut through lies the way a sharp knife parts silk, seeing ghosts in courtly smiles, hidden blades behind every salute. In a world as wide as Runeterra, no empire is ruled by a single will, and in Noxus, the oldest shadow wears petals. The Black Rose had been there long before Swain, whispering into the ears of Borum Darkwill, rewriting laws, erasing names from history as easily as one wipes dust from a mirror. Their manipulations helped create the chaos that made Swain's coup possible, yet it was Swain who followed the scent of their conspiracies into catacombs and forgotten archives, who learned just enough of their pattern to turn their own networks into levers. So who uses whom? On parchment, it is simple. Swain exposes Darkwill, topples a rotting regime, bends certain Black Rose agents to his cause, and claims to have caged the serpent. But behind his visions there is a deeper presence, a demon of secrets, a spirit of never-forgotten sins that feeds on conflict and hidden bargains. When Swain peers through a raven's many-faceted gaze and glimpses a Black Rose ritual, is he hunting the Cabal, or is something older simply arranging that he sees precisely what it wishes him to see? This is the horror of partial knowledge. To rule Noxus is to sit upon a throne of dossiers compiled by liars, spectres, and survivors of older wars, to make choices for millions while knowing that every report may be curated by an inhuman archivist whose interests are not your own. Swain understands that he is surrounded by masks and echoes. He also understands that hesitation is its own executioner. He moves armies based on visions that might be prophecy or manipulation. He prunes the Black Rose, yet cannot uproot the soil that grew it. He stands as mastermind, yet the floor beneath him is a lattice of trapdoors built by LeBlanc's centuries of masquerade, and by the demon's hunger for a world perpetually on the verge of war. In Runeterra, even those who seem most in control are often only the clearest silhouettes cast by older, deeper conspiracies burning behind them. So when Swain stares into the dark between his raven's wings and sees futures where Noxus survives by embracing its monsters, you must wonder, is he steering the Empire away from a greater abyss, or carefully, dutifully marching it toward the design of something that has never once needed a crown? The next secret we must follow will not be content with one empire at all. Beyond Noxus. Does the Black Rose touch the whole world? The design of something that has never once needed a crown. The next secret we must follow will not be content with one empire at all. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. You have walked Noxus's corridors and seen the rose etched on hidden rings and wax seals. But in a world as wide as Runeterra, symbols do not respect borders. They travel on trade caravans and mercenary blades, on the tongues of exiles who swear they have forgotten, yet still trace that curling petal in spilled wine when they think no one sees. There are places, far from the immortal bastion, where the mark of the Black Rose appears like a misprint in history. A Damatian mage hunter finds a cache of forbidden tomes beneath a village shrine, their spines bound with the same thorned sigil that once adorned Borum Darkwill's private archive. A Shuriman tomb is opened, and among relics of the sun disk, a mirror of impossible age waits, its glass humming with illusions that taste of LeBlanc's old, cruel mirth. High on Targon, a star scribe quietly redacts a prophecy at the request of a benefactor, whose face she cannot remember, only the scent of distant roses crushed underfoot. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. You see it in patterns rather than proclamations. Noxian warbands arrive in Shurima just as a particular ruin is uncovered, then depart with more scholars than soldiers. Damatian patrols receive anonymous tips that lead them to mages who would have slipped through any ordinary net, as if someone were curating which sorcerers survive. Targonian acolytes vanish not during great celestial events, but in the uneventful years between, when no one is watching the mountain too closely. Remember what draws the Black Rose: magic, longevity, the bending of time and memory until the past becomes a garden to be pruned. Shuriman relics promise ascension and sun-forged immortality. Damatia's mage hunters offer a living laboratory in how to cage the arcane. Targon's star scribes hold maps of cycles that even LeBlanc might fear. Are these merely targets, or are they also mirrors, each harbouring its own quiet cabal, its own patient gardener in the dark? One cabal, one mistress of masks, one empire under glass. Yet listen closely to the echo. In Zorn, chem barons trade lives for profit and secrets for chemtech. In Ionia, orders of shadow and balance argue over who may kill in the name of harmony. In the Freljord and Shurima, devotees of the Void and the Watchers kneel to powers that would rewrite the world itself. They share no formal oath with the Black Rose, and yet their methods rhyme. Erase, replace, forget. Perhaps LeBlanc's circle is not an exception but a template, the clearest silhouette of a pattern that repeats across the land. If one woman can wear a dozen faces and quietly redirect an empire's history, how many unnamed hands are doing the same in cities that never learned to fear a rose? The horror here is not that the Black Rose touches every corner of the world, but that it does not need to. It only has to show that such power is possible. And once you have seen that design, you must ask, when you look at Piltover's gilded bridges, Zaun's green-lit depths, or the tranquil monasteries of Ionia, are you seeing the world as it is, or as someone somewhere has already decided it must appear? Our next organisations will answer that question not with banners, but with ledgers, oaths and knives held just out of sight. The city that eats its own. Piltover, Zaun, and invisible empires. So let us descend. Allow the night to grow a little deeper as the lanterns of Piltover flicker to life above, each one mirrored by a sickly, greenish glow far below. You stand on a bridge of polished stone and brass, the wind carrying the clean bite of sea salt and engine oil, while under your feet, hidden vents breathe out a different incense entirely. Rust, rot, and the faint, metallic sweetness of spilled chem. Piltover and Zaun are called twin cities, but twins can be estranged, can they not? Above, lecture halls rise like cathedrals, academies ring with debate, and the councils speak of progress as if it were a pure and shining spirit. Below, the streets narrow into iron ribs, chasms open between leaning tenements, and the sky itself is a rumour smothered by smoke. Elevators and trade routes connect them, yes, but so do secret ledgers, unmarked crates, and agreements signed in rooms without windows. On the surface, Piltover appears simple to read. There are councils, appointed officials, enforcers with polished badges and codified law. Yet this is only the most polite layer of the story, the mask held up for visiting dignitaries. Beneath it, you find investors whose names never appear on factory gates, smugglers who dine with scholars, industrialists who decide with a word and a signature which inventions will transform the land and which will quietly disappear into locked vaults. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A promising Hextech design suddenly denied funding. A shipment of volatile chemtech rerouted through an unregistered dock. An enforcer reassigned after asking the wrong question. None of this breaks the law because the law bends before it can be broken. In a world as wide as Runeterra, power often prefers to be an influence rather than a decree. Then the floor drops away and you are in Zaun. The air thickens, the light turns poisonous, and the sound of distant machinery becomes a kind of ceaseless grinding prayer. Here, the Chem Barons do not merely own factories, they own mornings and nights, lungs and veins. Entire districts answer to a single signature bound by debt ink on paper, by addiction bottled in shimmering vials, by monopolies on chemtech that decides who breathes filtered air and who coughs their life out in the dark. These are not monarchs crowned in daylight. They are brothers and rivals in an invisible war, carving the city into fiefdoms of labour, housing and survival. Work is granted, then withheld. Tenements are raised, then left to rot. A whisper from Piltover's investors becomes, in Zaun, a new line of credit, a harsher quota, a cheaper, more lethal formula. Up above, Piltover calls Zaun's suffering an unfortunate side effect, a regrettable but necessary price for progress. Yet the ledgers tell a different story. Many of Piltover's brightest fortunes swell precisely because the Chem Barons are willing to do what official law cannot. Test unstable compounds on desperate bodies, dump waste where no councillor will ever walk, turn human need into a laboratory for profit. Here is your pattern interrupt. Piltover's greatest safeguards, its proud regulations and ethical boards are not a wall but a mirror. Every rule reflected downward creates a gap that someone below is paid to fill. The city does not merely tolerate its shadow, it commissions it. In Piltover and Zaun, power is not a throne you can seize in a single night. It is a flow of coin, patents and formulas, a river of influence that slips through pipes and contracts, changing course whenever it is threatened. You cannot duel a ledger. You cannot put a blade to a trade route. So the true rulers remain hard to see and harder still to challenge, even as their decisions shape wars far from these bridges and depths. And if such invisible empires can grow beneath a city of progress, what might be blooming, unseen beneath an empire of conquest or a land of supposed balance? Our next organisations will answer from older shadows, where roses never wither and oaths outlive the men who swore them. Chem Barons and quiet wars, the cabals of Zaun. So let us descend, summoner, from marble and banners into the metal lungs beneath. Allow the night to grow a little deeper as we cross the bridge into Zorn, where the air itself is collateral and every breath you take has an owner. Up above, Piltover sells the story of progress. Down here, progress is a weapon, and men you will never meet wage quiet wars with it over the city's soul. Chem barons do not wear crowns. They wear sigils. You see them flaking from brick and rusted pipe, half gang tag, half corporate crest, a stylized lung over a clinic door, a snarling rat stamped on cargo crates, a dripping vial painted 3 times on the same wall so no one mistakes whose street this is. Each symbol marks a domain, not in tidy lines, but in a patchwork of factories, slums, and smuggling routes stitched together by fear, debt, and fumes that never quite clear. Their power is not declared. It is owed. A mother signs a predatory loan to keep her child's lungs from collapsing, and the interest is paid in years of labour she will never escape. A dock worker inhales a proprietary chem that makes his muscles sing and his nerves forget fatigue, and within weeks his body cannot remember how to move without it. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A crime lord, a shakedown, a gun in the dark. But here the gun is a contract, the shakedown is a discount, and the crime lord is a boardroom you will never see. Private security patrols these borders, mercenaries in mismatched armour with chem masks hissing at the seams, enforcing curfews no law ever wrote. The same sigil that promises protection on the clinic door promises retribution if you buy medicine from the wrong baron. Inside, white-tiled charity wards gleam under sickly lamps, and patients sign waivers they cannot read while new compounds drip into their veins. Progress, they are told. A chance, a choice. In a world as wide as Runeterra, what is one neighbourhood weighed against a breakthrough? Beneath even this, in sealed basements and forgotten rail tunnels, the clandestine circles gather. Researchers, tinkerers, disgraced professors, starry-eyed apprentices. Some truly believe they are saving the land. Others have simply stopped asking whom it must be saved for. They are funded by faceless benefactors whose coin turns personal obsessions into city-shaping disasters. A baron wants cheaper enforcers, and a circle breeds chem-augmented brutes. Another dreams of clean air and instead births a volatile gas that eats metal, then flesh. Let the details move past you like drifting ash as we pause on one name you know. Singed. To Piltover, a madman. To Zorn's deeper ledgers, an investment. A fringe scientist whose patrons stay hidden while his experiments carve scars into people and stone. A district wakes to find its river running phosphorescent green. Children cough up glassy shards of crystal for weeks. The baron who paid for this simply redraws their sigil 2 blocks uphill and calls it unfortunate but instructive. This is how wars are fought here. No declarations, no banners, only backroom negotiations where entire neighbourhoods become test sites, bargaining chips, or controlled burns to secure a monopoly. A failed chem is vented through tenements to see how fast it spreads. A rival's clinic, accidentally, receives a tainted shipment. The spirit of the city is measured in profit margins and survival rates, and both are quietly adjusted. The horror here is quiet, yet it spreads like fog, seeping into every crevice of brick and bone until no one remembers a time when breathing was not a transaction. And if Zaun's future can be bought and sold in such invisible exchanges, ask yourself, when these chem barons look up toward Piltover's shining towers, do they see a separate city or their next laboratory? Because somewhere above these fumes, other cabals are watching, and some of them do not merely want to own a city, they want to rewrite history itself. Piltover's clean hands. How the upper city pretends not to know, allow the night to grow a little deeper as you lift your gaze from Zorn's fumes to Piltover's terraces of glass and gold. Up here, the air pretends to be clean. The wind moves differently, carrying the chime of clockwork towers instead of the cough of engines, and if you listen only to the speeches, you would think this city has no shadows at all. Piltover tells a careful story about itself. It is the city of progress, a land where merit is a blade honed on study and sleepless labour, where every council seat and academy post has been earned, never bought, never bled for in someone else's lungs. In a world as wide as Runeterra, it offers itself as proof that genius can rise from anywhere, that law and invention can stand together like brothers keeping each other honest. That is the mask. You are meant to admire the craftsmanship and never ask what it costs to wear. Look closer and you will see the seams. The horror here is quiet, like a ledger entry written in ink that will never see a courtroom. Piltover's banks extend generous lines of credit to Came-Barren fronts, funding refineries that technically sit outside their jurisdiction, while trade councils negotiate tariffs that squeeze Zornite workshops until they accept contracts no Piltover artisan would tolerate. Inspectors descend with full fury on an unlicensed street vendor in the entresol, yet somehow fail to notice entire warehouses of illegal chemtech humming just below the bridge line, so long as the shipment routes favour Piltover docks. The families who benefit rarely touch the grime. They do not sign the dirtiest contracts, they sign memoranda of understanding with intermediaries who, in turn, own shell companies whose addresses are little more than a door in the lanes and a name on a rusted plate. Agreements are made in back rooms after council sessions, not recorded in the minutes, but remembered in the quiet nods that follow. If a scandal surfaces, a single expendable broker is disavowed. The paper trail ends in a dead man's desk, and the city's self-image survives with only a brief shiver. Then there are the laboratories. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A failed Hextech prototype that destabilizes flesh, a shimmer derivative that fractures the mind, a containment field that occasionally forgets what is inside it. Officially, these projects are halted. Unethical. In practice, crates are lowered by winch into waiting Zornite skiffs, and the experiments continue where regulations are more flexible and lives are cheaper. Clandestine circles of researchers pass notes between academy salons and sump-side basements. Trading data written in the language of progress and paid for in bodies no Piltover registry counts. 2 cities, one above and one below. One innocent and one damned. But Piltover and Zaun are not rivals. They are a single organism, sharing poisoned blood. The respectable face smiles in the daylight, signing trade accords and scholarship grants, while the diseased organs hidden in the dark churn out chem. Addiction and disposable labour to keep the gears turning. Every gleaming tower has a reflection in the polluted river, every law has an exception carved out where profit demands it. And as we move deeper into Runeterra's secret orders, remember this. Some of the most dangerous cabals do not need daggers or demons. They only need a city willing to look away. When experiments become gods, catastrophe as a business model. Zaun does not need daggers when it has pressure valves. It does not need demons when it has rusting pipes, sleepless chemists, and a river that burns. Allow the night to grow a little deeper and look down into the sump with me, where the city's heartbeat is a slow, irregular thud of pumps and leaking drums, and where catastrophe is less an accident than a seasonal rain. It begins, often, with a hiss. A tank ruptures in a forgotten warehouse, or a pipe explodes 3 levels below a respectable Piltover workshop, sending a green-black mist rolling through alleys like a low, poisonous wind. You can walk one street at dusk and see children playing in puddles. By morning, those same puddles are boiling, and the children's shadows are the only part of them that still fit their old bodies. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Industrial accident, tragic loss, mourning, reform. That is how it would unfold in a land that believed in witnesses. Zaun believes in contracts. Before the smoke has cleared, Chem-Barren envoys are already on the move, ledgers in hand, claiming salvage rights to twisted machines, patenting the very formula that ate through bone, buying the ruined building at a discount while it is still on fire. Survivors are not consoled. They are evaluated, measured like rare reagents, and quietly offered a choice that is not a choice at all. Those who live through the mutagenic fog become data points. A woman whose skin has hardened to a glassy carapace is signed into an employment bond as an enforcer. A boy whose veins now glow with volatile light is taken to a clandestine circle of researchers beneath the docks, his heartbeat timed against the drip of experimental serums. In a world as wide as Runeterra, grief might birth memorials. Here it births prototypes, but something else grows in the cracks. A cluster of altered survivors in one flooded block begins to move together, at first out of fear, then out of recognition, then with the slow, dawning spirit of a shared fate. They name themselves after the colour of the mist that made them, paint sigils in that same shade on the walls, and start speaking of the spill as revelation instead of ruin. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A rusted shrine built from broken gauges, a leader whose lungs no longer breathe air but vapor, preaching that the chem chose them. This is how gangs become techno-cults. This is how a neighborhood, abandoned by every visible authority, rallies around a charismatic, warped figure who promises that their suffering is not meaningless, but ordained. The horror here is quiet because it does not need to shout. It only needs to repeat itself, spill after spill, until faith and fear are the same taste in the mouth. Without transparent law, the only governance is speed. Whoever can weaponize chaos first writes the rules. Chem barons turning melted families into market research. Hidden investors in Piltover refining disaster into trade secrets. Underground cabals trading formulas like war stories. Every scream is a dataset. Every burned-out block is a pilot program. And so, in Zon, the line between secret organization and emergent horror thins to a film of oily water over bottomless dark. Today's failed experiment might be tomorrow's hidden power block. A cult, a cartel, a brotherhood of the altered whose loyalties no law can predict. As we move deeper into Runeterra's concealed orders, remember the sump. Not every cabal is planned. Some are born when the city itself miscalculates and decides that catastrophe is still good business. Orders of light and shadow. Ionia's hidden spiritual machinery. So step back from Zorn's poisoned alleys and listen. The drip of chem falls away. In its place you hear bamboo knocking together in the dark, a temple bell counting the hours of a land that doesn't sleep. Allow the night to grow a little deeper. We are returning to Ionia, where secrets do not merely hide in shadows, they are written into the wind itself. Ionia calls its ideal balance, but the word is thinner than the work. Balance must be watched, argued over, killed for. In a world as wide as Runeterra, no empire has so many pacifists who carry blades. The Kinku are the oldest of these hidden custodians, an order that believes the world is a conversation between flesh and spirit, and that someone must stand at the edge of every sentence to decide when it should end. You can walk past a Kinku operative and never know you were spared. Their methods are not banners and open war, but corrections, like a calligrapher scraping away a single stroke before the whole page is ruined. A merchant whose greed has drawn hungry spirits to a village may find his caravan lost in a mist that never existed on any map. A warlord who toys with forbidden rites might die in his sleep, throat open by a blade no one remembers drawing. A shrine whose power has swollen dangerously could be quietly sealed, its priests reassigned. The story rewritten before the crisis ever reaches the realm of rumour. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A ledger altered, a general redirected to a different valley, a grieving widow nudged toward a certain pilgrimage trail where a spirit will finally hear her. The Kinku call this mercy. They erase the catastrophe before it can stain the land, believing that restraint is the highest form of power. But restraint has a cost, and war does not wait for rituals to conclude. When Noxian steel and fire came, when villages burned faster than councils could convene, one Kinku master looked at the measured pace of his order and saw not wisdom, but complicity. Zed, breaking from Shen, founding the Order of Shadow in blood and forbidden techniques. Yet beneath the headlines of betrayal lies something more terrible. Two brothers in teaching, raised on the same doctrine, choosing different ways to answer the same scream. Zed's Order of Shadow is not a random cult of murderers. It is the Kinku's reflection in shattered glass. Where the Kinku redirect, the shadows devour. Where the Kinku whisper to spirits, Zed binds them into weapons and living armor. His belief is brutally simple. A land that remembers every atrocity cannot afford half measures. If war has already poisoned the spirit of Ionia, then better to wield that poison than die politely beneath it. Both orders kneel in their own ways before the same altar, a land that records every oath, every broken promise, every corpse left unburied. The difference lies in what they are willing to sacrifice to keep that ledger from tipping into madness. The Kinku are willing to sacrifice lives in silence. The Order of Shadow is willing to sacrifice the very boundaries between mortal and spirit. These are not political factions arguing over tax or territory. They are metaphysical partisans, proposing different versions of reality itself. So when you hear that an Ionian assassin has struck, do not ask only whom they served, but which world they were trying to preserve. A world where imbalance is trimmed away like diseased branches in the night, or a world where imbalance is seized, sharpened, and hurled back at invaders. We will soon see how other lands answer that same question. With suns, with stars, with the cold hunger beneath the ice. The Kinku's gentle knife, saving the world by erasing it. Runeterra after dark, you have seen blades hired by empires and cults that kneel to the void. Yet there is another kind of knife in this world, one that claims no banner, no glory, no war. It glides through Ionia like a passing wind, leaving only a faint correction where a life used to be. The Kinku call it balance. Not peace, not justice, balance. In a world as wide as Runeterra, they read the land and the spirit realm the way a scribe reads ink, searching for lines that grow too dark, too thick, too hungry. A village that pours every prayer into a single river spirit until the fields around it begin to glow, wrong at night. A warlord whose cruelty echoes so loudly in the unseen that ghosts gather around his camp like carrion birds. A ritual in some forgotten shrine that pulls too much power from one side of reality and leaves the other side thin and fraying. Monks who listen to leaves and meditate on mountaintops, guardians who step in only when the scales tip too far. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Sometimes the Kinku intervene with nothing more than a warning, a masked figure at a threshold telling a priestess to end her rites, or a scroll delivered in the night to a magistrate, naming the single decree that must not be signed. Other times the correction is softer still, a dream sent to a clan leader in which his own ancestors turn their backs, driving him to abandon a campaign he would have won, but should not. A sudden impulse in a young general's heart to spare a village that was meant to burn because a spirit's whisper has been guided, ever so slightly, by Kinku hands. And when dreams and whispers fail, the knife becomes literal. A silent assassination that removes a person or an entire circle of them before their choices can harden into fate. Entire communities can be guided without ever seeing a mask. Crops fail just enough year after year to force a migration away from a ley line that is beginning to scream. A local shrine collapses in a harmless rock slide, its idol buried so that no one can finish the chant that would have woken something listening beneath the roots. A charismatic preacher whose sermons pull too many spirits to one place dies of an illness that leaves no mark but a faint, precise bruise over the heart. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and you begin to see the cost. Each Kinku carries a ledger no mortal ink can show, a running account of lives ended, futures erased, brothers never born because a marriage was quietly averted. They tell themselves that the spirit realm keeps a truer balance sheet, that every invisible crime is weighed against a disaster prevented, a war that never began, a rift that never tore open. In this way, the Kinku are not only protectors, they are censors of reality itself. They decide which stories are allowed to unfold and which are edited out of existence before the first line is spoken, all in service to a balance only they are trained to see. But what happens when another order looks at the same shadows, the same screams in the spirit wind, and decides that balance is not to be preserved, but broken and reforged by force? Zed's heresy. When guardians become assassins. So let us follow that thought into darker corridors. Imagine the same temple courtyards, the same bells and bamboo, but now the wind carries not incense smoke, but the iron tang of a land learning to scream. Zed's breaking point does not arrive as a single outburst. It seeps in raid by raid. He walks through villages after Noxian detachments pass, shrines toppled, children staring at blades they should never have seen, the spirit of Ionia itself shuddering like an animal that has been kicked too often. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Each time the Kinku elders say the same words: wait, watch, preserve balance. Each time to Zed, restraint begins to taste like complicity. The dutiful student who turned against his master, the assassin who chose shadow over harmony. But from inside his eyes, the choice looks different. When he finds the forbidden techniques, the shadow forms that reach past the veil and use the darkness between spirits as a weapon, it feels less like corruption and more like finally listening to what the war-torn land is already whispering. If the invaders do not respect balance, he reasons, why should their killers be bound by it? From that conclusion, an order grows, not from temples and lineages, but from ruins. Zed walks the broken roads and gathers those the Kinku never would. Orphans who watched their brothers die in Noxian fire, maimed soldiers discarded by both empire and province, outcasts whose names the polite shrines refuse to speak. He offers them something brutally simple, purpose in exchange for obedience, a story in which their scars are not accidents, but initiation marks. Training is not merely discipline, it is erasure, sanding down hesitation until only the mission remains. Where the Kinku slip through walls to correct a metaphysical imbalance and leave no trace, the Order of Shadow prefers that traces remain. A magistrate who collaborated with Noxus does not simply vanish. He is found at dawn, throat opened with surgical care, his blood painting a sigil visible from the temple roof. A Noxian officer is killed not on the battlefield but in his barracks, surrounded by terrified recruits who will carry that memory home. Their killings are messages, arguments written in red across the conscience of Ionia. In a world as wide as Runeterra, every secret order casts a second shadow. What it does to its own people. The Order of Shadow claims to be a shield against invaders, yet villagers learn to fear their passing as much as any foreign patrol. Priests temper their sermons, merchants whisper before trading with outsiders. The horror here is quiet, but it is everywhere, reshaping behaviour through the possibility of a visit in the night. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and a colder question remains. Was this truly a betrayal of the Kinku, or merely an honest unveiling of what was always there? The Kinku killed for balance, only softly, with rules and euphemisms. Zed rips away the mask and says aloud what the blades were already doing. When an order accepts murder as a sacred tool, is it the volume of the scream that changes, or the soul of the act itself? Hold that unease, because other powers in Runeterra have asked the same question, and answered it with empires. Two faces of one wound. Are the Kinku and Shadow Order opposites? Sit with that question about the scream and the soul, and let the wind move through it, because before you can name the Kinku and the Order of Shadow as enemies, you must admit something more unsettling. They are brothers before they are rivals. They grew from the same soil, drank from the same spring, bled under the same teachers who first showed them how fragile Ionia truly was. In a world as wide as Runeterra, it is tempting to sort every blade into clean categories, defender or butcher, monk or murderer. Yet Shen and Zed knelt on the same temple stones, copied the same sacred texts until their hands cramped, listened to the same elders speak of imbalance like a creeping rot in the land. They both watched Noxian war machines grind through bamboo and bone. They both learned that when the spirit realm tilts, mortals die in ways no tally can hold. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Peaceful order versus ruthless assassin, balance versus vengeance. But if you strip away the rhetoric, their methods rhyme with a precision that should chill you. Both orders move in secrecy. Both pass sentence without public trial. Both kill so that others may sleep through the night, never knowing which name almost became an offering. They claim to serve Ionia itself, not a daimyo, not a village, not a single warlord's whim. The difference is not that one spills blood and the other does not. The difference is how loudly they are willing to admit it. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A Kinku operative nudging a corrupt magistrate toward a fatal accident. An acolyte of Shadow cutting the same man down in the street and leaving the body as a warning. The goal is identical. The threshold is not. How much visible suffering can be permitted before the land fractures? How many lives can be erased in silence before secrecy itself becomes a kind of cruelty? A slow, suffocating war no one is allowed to name. At some point, for Zed, open brutality felt like the only honest path, a confession carved into mortal flesh. From the spirit realm's vantage, do these distinctions hold? Imagine looking not at faces or creeds, but at the marks they leave. Two orders etching different scars into the same metaphysical skin. One fine and hidden like hairline fractures in porcelain, the other jagged and blackened like lightning strikes. Every execution is a line. Every vanished dissident is another stroke of ink. Here, a pattern interrupt. What if the real divide is not moral at all, but aesthetic? Masked mercy versus declared terror, both born from the same fear that Ionia will fall if someone does not decide who must die first. And if that is true here, how many rival secret organizations across this haunted land are merely siblings, arguing over volume? The Black Rose and Noxus's official legions, Zorn's Chembarons and Piltover's councils, void cults and the watchers they worship, each pair may be less enemy and more mirror. In the next breath, we will step beyond Ionia's forests and ask which other hidden orders share a cradle and a wound. Cultists of the Abyss. The first whispers of the void. To follow that line, you must walk past roses and chem, past masked councils and arguing brothers, and come to a place where there is no argument at all, because there is no one left to speak. In a world as wide as Runeterra, most secret orders hoard stories, lineages, prophecies, archives of names. The next ones we meet serve something that wants every name, every history, every whispered legend ground down into silence. Imagine a horizon with no stars, no moon, not even the faintest glow of distant cities. Only a pressure, like a hand over the world's mouth. That is the void, as its truest worshippers understand it. Not merely a tide of monsters, but an absence that hungers, a place where meaning itself dissolves and memory has nothing left to cling to. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. You have seen chittering beasts tear through Freljordian ice, watched purple fishes bloom in Shuriman sand, heard of watchers dreaming beneath the glaciers. Yet void cults do not begin with armies. They begin with a single mind that cannot stop listening. A shard of a frozen watcher, half buried in a village shrine. A relic from Icathia, humming in a Piltover vault. A hairline crack in a forgotten cavern where the wind does not sound like wind at all, but like a distant chorus, promising release. From these splinters, small gatherings form. A priest who wakes to the same violet dream each night and starts preaching that the spirits were wrong. A Shuriman scholar who touches an Icathian tablet and feels her grief evaporate, along with her fear. A Freljordian hunter who hears voices beneath the ice, offering power against warbands and winter both. They meet in basements, in derelict observatories, in caves where the land itself seems to sag. They share visions, trade fragments of language that are not quite words, and learn to love the feeling of their own thoughts thinning. Their traces are scattered and terrible. A coastal town whose entire population vanishes overnight, leaving only spiraled patterns carved into doorframes. A Zornite sump where the chem turns translucent and wrong, refusing to reflect faces. A Shuriman oasis that becomes a glassy crater ringed with stones that whisper when the night is windless. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. Missing records, warped landscapes, relics that radiate a wrongness beyond simple magic, as if the story of that place had been half erased mid-sentence. Why would anyone choose this? In a land ruled by hidden cabals, by black roses and chembarons and sun priests who edit history like a ledger, the void's promise can sound like justice. No more rigged wars, no more blades drawn by unseen hands, only an end so absolute that no one can twist it. For the desperate, for those broken by lies and cycles of conquest, the thought that every mask, every archive, every spirit and star could be swallowed can feel less like horror and more like peace. And here is what sets these cults apart from every other shadowed order we have met. They do not want to control the story of Runeterra. They want to end the possibility of stories altogether, to invite in patrons, the watchers, who dream of a world where even regret cannot survive. Runeterra after dark, we must ask, if some secret organizations seek to rule history and some to erase it, what kind of power would dare to rewrite both at once? Watchers in the dark, worshipping what should not be seen. To answer that, you have to step into a different kind of congregation, one that meets where no sun or moon can judge it. Imagine a cavern beneath Freljord's oldest ice, or a Shuriman ruin, drowned in violet shadow, where the wind does not move, and yet something vast seems to breathe in the stone. Here, the Watchers are not a warning, they are a liturgy. In a world as wide as Runeterra, most faiths worship what they can at least name. These do not. The Watchers, as the lore lets you glimpse them, are not deities in robes or beasts with crowns, but horizons of frozen thought pressed against the world, imprisoned beneath true ice, half dreaming behind the stain of the void. They do not speak in words. They press in as pressure on the mind, as dreams that taste of static and uncolour, as corrupted magic that bends a mage's will until it snaps like a blade left too long in frost. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. To their cults, that silence is sanctity. Foolish mortals, hungry for power, tricked by an emptiness that hates them. Yet listen to the prayers whispered in those ice caverns. They call the Watchers liberators, not destroyers, promising an end to war, to memory, to the ache of being a self that can regret. To them, the void is not an absence, but a final, merciful spirit that will cleanse the land of lies and history alike. Their rituals reflect that inversion. In Freljord, they carve sigils into glacier walls above the imprisoned titans, mixing blood with powdered true ice so that each cut on the surface becomes an invitation below. In Shurima, they gather in buried temples, circling void-touched relics that pulse like blind eyes, using them as oracles that answer not with prophecy, but with erasure, stripping names from stone and faces from memory. Sometimes they do not even hide their work. They let a village rot around a single artifact, watching as crops fail, as colours leach, as the world forgets itself, one boundary at a time. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A courier whose tongue has grown translucent, carrying messages between cells in the slums of Zorn. A scarred raider in the Freljord whose dreams are shared, word for word, by a priest beneath Shurima's sand. A series of matching symbols, eye, spiral, crack, scratched into walls from Noxus to Piltover by hands that have never met. These networks are built like infections, not empires. Each cell knows almost nothing of the others, linked by mutated messengers, by synchronized visions, by the subtle choreography of corruption spreading along trade routes and war fronts. Success, for them, is not counted in converts, banners, or kings enthralled. It is measured in how much of reality no longer holds. A forest where spirits fall silent. A battlefield where blood sinks into ground that refuses to remember war. A city street where everyone steps around a building that is no longer there, and no one can say what stood there before. The horror here is quiet because it is subtractive. When you finally notice what they have done, it is not a new terror added to the world, but an old comfort missing from it. Runeterra after dark, you must ask yourself, how do you fight an organization whose victory condition is not ruling the story, but deleting the page? In the next breath, we will turn to those who sense this unmaking and try in their own secret ways to rewrite fate faster than the void can erase it. Kassadin, Malzahar, and the thin line between profit and pawn. So you follow that question into a darker corridor where the page is already smudged and the ink smells like something that is not ink at all. Feel how the wind in this part of Runeterra does not simply move leaves or sand, it seems to move intentions, drawing certain men toward a single, hungry absence beneath the land. Kassadin begins as so many tragedies do, with a father, a husband, a man who thought the world's horrors were far away. In a world as wide as Shurima's deserts, he was merely a guide, a voice that knew safe paths through treacherous dunes, a blade hired to keep caravans alive. Then one village vanished, then another, and finally his own. Not with fire or war banners, but with a silence so complete it felt like the desert had swallowed the names of the dead, along with their bodies. The grieving warrior who goes too far. The widower who descends into the abyss to drag his lost family back or die beside them. Yet Kassadin's descent into the void is not heroic in the way tales prefer. It is desperate. It is guided by half-mad cult rumours, by maps no sane spirit would draw, by the promise that somewhere beneath Icathia's ruins, an answer waits. He returns changed. Skin marked by impossible energies, breath tasting of cold between stars air, armed with a blade that hums like a trapped scream and a device that tears holes in reality as easily as cloth. He believes he has stolen weapons from the enemy, but the horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. The artifacts that cling to him are not merely tools, they are messages, channels, perhaps invitations. When he blinks through space, whose will bends? When his weapon drinks something that is not quite blood, who is truly fed? Now placed beside him, Malzahar, once a seer of Shurima's crowded streets, a man who heard too many futures and found in all of them the same refrain: ruin, war, collapse. Where Kassadin dove seeking to sever the void, Malzahar merely looked, and the void looked back. In that gaze he felt not chaos but structure, not madness but what he took for clarity. The voices told him that the world was already lost, that only surrender to the great unmaking could grant it a different kind of peace. He walks now as a prophet, and cults blossom in his shadow like bruises. Farmers, soldiers, forgotten brothers of failed orders. He gathers them into circles that whisper to the dark between stars, promising release from pain, from choice, from the burden of a future. Yet, even here, the voices he serves may not be one. The Watchers are not a choir, they are a parliament of hungers. When Malzahar says destiny, which appetite is speaking through his tongue? Let the details move past you like drifting ash. Kassadin hunting cults he barely understands, Malzahar building them in basements and canyons, both convinced they lead, both trailed by patterns that feel older than their first breath. Are they wielding the void as a weapon? Or has the void, patient as frost, slipped its fingers into their grief and conviction, steering each step? This is what secret organizations tied to inhuman powers always threaten to become. Not councils, but conduits, where leadership and possession blur until a man cannot say whether he commands the darkness or merely articulates it. Runeterra after dark. You must remember this when we turn, in the next breath, to cabals that lack tentacles and star hunger, yet still move nations like pieces on a board. Not all hidden masters speak from the abyss. Some wear mortal faces, and some, like a certain undying rose, prefer to let empires believe they rule themselves. The Hidden Inquisition, Damasia's mage hunters, and silent circles. Some wear crowns of thorns, you can see. Some wrap themselves in laws so immaculate you mistake them for light. Allow the night to grow a little deeper as we leave Noxus's perfumed conspiracies and walk to a kingdom that swears it has nothing to hide at all. Demacia greets you with banners, with marble, with hymns about honor that rise like incense into a wind carefully stripped of magic. In a world as wide as Runeterra, few lands cling so fiercely to a single story about themselves, a realm of order and law, a bastion against the chaos that arcane power brings, a place where purity is not merely praised, but weaponized. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. You are told that magic corrupts. You are told that it unravels brothers, kingdoms, wars, that it whispers to the weak and turns them into tyrants. So Demacia builds its walls not only of petricite and stone, but of doctrine, of suspicion, of 1,000 small choices to look away when the law bites too deep. Officially, there are mage seekers, sanctioned hunters who track the scent of the arcane, drag suspects from farms and alleys, and deliver them to cells where the light is thin and the prayers are loud. Yet what is official in such a land is only half the story. Around these orders coil looser, darker circles, retired officers who still keep lists, temple zealots who hear heresy in every strange dream, informants paid in coin, in favours, in the promise that their own secrets will sleep undisturbed. They move through villages and salons with the same calm as a priest at dawn, asking gentle questions whose wrong answers end in irons. Many wear no badge at all, they do not need one. Fear of magic makes excellent soil. In it, denunciations grow like weeds. A merchant envies a rival's success and murmurs that the man's harvest came too easily. A spurned lover remembers how her former beloved's anger flared, how the candles shook, and decides that must have been a spirit's touch. A neighbour hears a child singing to the night and wonders who might listen if he spoke of it. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A glance held too long, a ledger altered, a whispered accusation dressed as piety. Beneath the hymns, there are more deliberate gatherings. Certain nobles meet behind shuttered windows to decide which incidents will be called accidents, which outbreaks of wild magic will be buried beneath collapsed quarries or vanished witnesses. Certain commanders quietly divert mage-born soldiers to remote postings from which no letters return. Certain magistrates arrange that one terrified girl is paraded through a public trial, while 3 others simply never reach the docket at all. Demasia's purity is not a state, it is a project, and projects must be maintained. They require reports. They require enemies. They require that those who have built their authority on hunting the arcane forever find new shadows to chase, even if they must be painted onto the walls. A righteous kingdom, a cursed power, a simple line between them. But watch long enough and you see the line blur, then twist until the hunters depend on the hunted to justify their own reflection. Runeterra after dark, you must keep this in mind when we climb from Demasia's polished plazas to lands where power no longer pretends to be clean at all, where sun discs, star scribes, and those who listen to the cold between constellations write destinies no blade can easily cut free. Secrets under white stone, the cost of Demasian purity. But before we ascend to those star scribes and sun discs, you must walk once more beneath white stone, where the light is bright enough to blind. Demacia gleams in the daylight, banners snapping in the wind, marble plazas ringing with drills and hymns. Yet beneath that polish lies a different kind of order, one that does not wear armour in public or carve its sigil on shields. In a world as wide as Runeterra, not every war is fought against an enemy you can name. Some are waged against a possibility, a fear, a child's first spark on a winter morning. Here, suspicion is taught like scripture. Mothers watch their sons flinch when a lantern shatters and the flame jumps. Fathers correct trembling hands that make the air stir just a little too eagerly. And both learn the same discipline. Do not speak, do not ask, do not let the neighbours see. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A noble kingdom, a simple law. Magic is forbidden. Purity is protection. Yet in the alleys behind the courts, in barrack cellars and chapel crypts, there are circles of men and women whose true profession is accusation. A rival for a council seat suddenly becomes suspect. An inconvenient land dispute ends when one side whispers that the other's youngest daughter made the candles flicker. Personal grudges are washed clean in the language of righteousness. When a mage hunting patrol breaks down a door at night, it is not called revenge. It is called duty. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, and you see how this corrodes the very hand that wields it. Princes and stewards must stand before crowds and promise vigilance, must praise those same hunters for their zeal, while their own private halls hide contraband tomes, enchanted heirlooms, the faint shimmer of wards along a nursery wall. Some among Demasia's highest bloodlines have bargained for magical artifacts to secure their power, have relied on forbidden remedies to survive illness, then signed decrees condemning peasants for lesser transgressions. The law is a mirror they hold up to others and carefully tilt away from themselves. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. Lux, smiling in court, fingers unconsciously tracing light in the air before she forces them still. Silas, chained in the dark, hands bound not just by iron but by the fear that his very existence justifies the chains of 1,000 more. They are not exceptions. They are symptoms of a kingdom at war with its own spirit, brothers and sisters turned informants, children learning that love means learning where to hide the evidence of who you are. In the end, Demasia's most secret organisation may not meet in catacombs at all. It lives in glances shared between judges who know the trial's a theatre, in nobles who sign arrest orders with shaking hands, in commanders who pray that no one notices the way the wind bends around their blade. It is a collective conscience that understands silently that Demasian purity is mortared with lies, with disappearances, with futures quietly strangled before they can take shape. How long can such a land stand when its brightest light depends on shadows it refuses to name? And what happens when one of those shadows decides to answer back? Sundisks and sleeper cells. Shurima's loyalists in the sand shadows. Answering back are not only a Demasian problem. In a world as wide as Runeterra, every empire that pretends to be eternal leaves behind something when it falls. bones, ruins, and those who refuse to admit that the sun has set. Follow me south, past the last green fields, into a land where the horizon wavers and an old star still dreams beneath the sand. Shurima's empire did not simply collapse, it was unmade in an instant. A continent-sized temple shattered when Azir's ascension failed and the sun disk vomited light that turned stone to glass and cities to drifting ash. Centuries later, you watch that same emperor claw his way back from dust, a golden spirit walking once more beneath his resurrected disk, while the legacies of other ascended still prowl the dunes like wounded gods. A fallen empire, a risen emperor, a promised rebirth. But empires do not rise on monuments alone. They rise on memory. While Shurima lay buried, there were priests who never stopped reciting the dawn hymns, scholars who smuggled star charts and solar liturgies out of burning libraries, and bloodlines that braided forbidden prayers into their children's lullabies. In forgotten cisterns beneath village wells, in half-collapsed way shrines swallowed by dunes, they kept the sun disk alive, as ritual, as prophecy, as a blade of identity hidden in the sleeve of ordinary life. These are the Sun Disk Loyalists, not a single order, but a constellation of sleeper cells and secret households, measuring their days not by kings' reigns, but by eclipses and solstices. One cell hoards cracked golden tiles said to have fallen from the original disk, polishing them each night while the wind screams outside. Another trains its initiates as merchants and caravan guards, teaching them how to read both trade ledgers and omens in the same careful hand. They infiltrate local councils, temple staffs, even foreign trading companies, quietly steering contracts away from Noxian garrisons or Piltover dig sites, sabotaging expeditions that pry too hungrily at Shurima's buried bones. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A poisoned water cache that forces an invading warband to turn back. A sandstorm that arrives exactly when a foreign survey team nears a sealed, ascended tomb. A scribe's tiny alteration in a border treaty that keeps a crucial oasis under a loyalist clan's control for another generation. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and you might miss the pattern, yet even the sun casts more than one shadow. Among these secret societies, unity fractures along lines of faith and fear. Some kneel in private to Azir's image as the rightful, radiant fulfillment of all their whispered prophecies, believing his return proves their patience was holy. Others murmur that his failure once doomed them all and place their hopes instead in alternative claimants, forgotten royal offshoots, half-mythic heirs, or even the more monstrous ascended whose cruelty they reinterpret as necessary strength in a world sliding toward war. A few go further, reading the disc not as a symbol of empire, but as a weapon that must be wielded without mercy, even if Shurima must burn to be reborn. Allow the night to grow a little deeper and listen to the desert breathe. This land remembers in ways Demasia's marble never can. Every dune is a slow-moving archive. Every buried obelisk is a sealed instruction. These loyalists are simply the fingers that will one day turn the pages. They are willing to wait as brothers become ancestors, as foreign flags rise and rot, as the wind erases one set of footprints after another, until the sun finally rises on the version of Shurima they have chosen in secret. And they are not the only ones watching the sky for a sign. Ascended, Darkin, and the fractured legacy of Shuriman power. The wind over Shurima's dunes has a different weight than the wind in Ionia's forests. It moves over buried cities, over 1,000 forgotten banners, over stone that once drank sunlight like wine. You stand where the sand looks empty, yet under your feet lies the memory of a miracle that was also a weapon. A single, blazing invention that turned men into near gods and an empire into a continent-spanning decree. Ascension, under the sun disk, was hailed as the purest triumph of mortal spirit. Priests spoke of devotion, of sacrifice, of chosen heroes rising beyond hunger and sleep. But the horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Those radiant brothers and sisters of the sky did not simply guard Shurima. They enforced it, crossing borders in strides, ending rebellions in moments, burning the lesson of obedience into the land itself. In a world as wide as Runeterra, the sun disk was less a halo and more a brand. Glorious ascended, then a fall. Yet time and war do not simply topple statues. They rot the souls that once posed for them. As Shurima fractured, its ascended were dragged through centuries of slaughter until many became darkin. Their purpose curdled, their radiance turned inward and venomous. Now they linger as blades and bows, as chains and living armour, each weapon a coffin and a mouth, whispering to the hand that dares to lift it, promising power, vengeance, an end to feeling small beneath the sun. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A caravan guard in the outskirts finds a strange, warm spearhead. A Noxian officer purchases an antique scimitar that hums when drawn. An Ionian collector acquires a Shuriman tablet etched with a forgotten Ascended's true name. Each discovery is private, almost trivial, yet each becomes a doorway. Around such relics, small warbands, cults and circles gather, some painting their eyes in gold dust to honour Azir's lost peers, others carving their flesh to please a slumbering Darkin who only remembers war. These groups tell their own versions of the story. One desert sect sings hymns to Nasus as judge and archivist, hoarding scrolls and sentencing trespassers in his name. Another, half bandit and half priesthood, follows the trail of a single Darkin bow, leaving villages emptied of archers and filled with sudden, fervent converts. The horror here is not in the size of these gatherings, but in their direction. Every oath they swear tugs at an ancient loyalty, waking echoes in beings who once shaped empires with a gesture. So Shurima's future is not merely a dialogue between Azir and the visible allies who kneel in his reborn capital. It is an argument conducted in tombs, in hidden camps, in ruins where only the wind attends the meetings. Some factions dream of a restored golden age, orderly and merciless. Others would crown the Darkin instead, preferring honest terror to gilded law, and there are a few who work only to keep all sons buried, believing the land is safer with no empire at all. When the next Shuriman War begins, you may not see these hands on the blade, but you will feel their choices in every shadow that moves before the dawn. Star scribes and hidden constellations, Targon's celestial orders. Those shadows before dawn do not only belong to men. Above them, another darkness leans close. Targon is that place where the sky itself seems to bend down to listen, where the constellations do not simply wheel in blind obedience to mathematics, but drift, pause, and realign with a deliberation that feels perilously like intent. The mountains there are not just stone. They are ladders, blades of rock driven upward into the heavens, inviting the brave and the broken to climb toward godlike aspects. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you expect empires to write history in blood, yet here the ink is starlight. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. You can stand on a Targonian ridge at night and feel the wind move around you with almost human hesitation, as if even the air is waiting for permission from the patterns above. Every fallen champion, every lost pilgrim, becomes one more faint reflection in a sky that remembers too much. It is in this thin, breathless altitude that the star scribes keep their vigil. They are not loud priests or conquering warlords, but scholars and mystics who measure the slow breathing of the firmament. By day they are archivists and mathematicians, tracing the paths of sun and moon across vellum blackened with ash. By night they kneel beneath open ceilings, recording when a constellation shivers, when an unfamiliar star appears beside the sigil of war, when destiny itself seems to tilt 1 degree toward some unseen shore. They interpret omens, yes, but more importantly, they decide which omens will ever be spoken aloud. That aspects simply choose their vessels and descend like falling swords. Yet around each aspect there coils a secret order, a quiet fraternity and sisterhood of believers who do not merely wait for miracles, they prepare them. The sun has its hidden devotees, stern and radiant, whispering in the ears of Solari generals, steering local wars so that the brightest, most ruthless, survive long enough to be noticed. The moon shelters its own, veiled acolytes who guide outcasts and nightwalkers towards silvered paths, making certain that when lunary power stirs, a suitable soul is already standing in the right shaft of light. Others bend their lives around more terrible patrons. There are those who serve the aspect of war, arranging border skirmishes and heroic last stands like pieces on a board, also that one exhausted commander will finally look up and beg the sky for strength. There are keepers of destiny who slip unsigned letters, chance meetings, and impossible survivals into the lives of chosen children until coincidence hardens into design. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A caravan delayed by a rock slide, a village spared from plague, a blade inherited instead of sold. Each is a quiet hand on the wheel. These Targonian circles do not simply read fate, they curate it. They hoard visions in chambers carved from meteorite glass, debating in low, fearful tones which futures are safe enough to release into the world. Some prophecies they bury in locked atlases, knowing that to speak them would be to summon the very horror they describe. Others they leak carefully through chosen emissaries, pilgrims, seers, even wandering brothers in search of meaning, trusting that a half-told story will ripen into a self-fulfilling revelation. They believe themselves guardians, archivists of fate, preserving the land by making sure the right stars rise over the right people at the right time. Imagine what happens when such archivists disagree, when one scribe decides that the sky's plan is itself a mistake. Somewhere in those high observatories, a single altered chart, a single hidden vision, has already bent the path of a champion you think you understand. And the next order we descend to will not be looking up at the stars at all, but down into something far older and far hungrier beneath the ice. When the heavens conspire, aspects, hosts, and mortal collateral. So let us pause on that altered chart, that hidden vision, and turn our gaze from parchment to flesh. Above Mount Targon, the sky does not simply shine, it chooses. It reaches down in rivers of light and pours itself into a single human frame, until one fragile body must carry a purpose as vast as the constellations that birthed it. An aspect and its host are not partners in any mortal sense. They are a fusion, a layered voice, a spirit braided through bone and memory until it is hard to say where the human ends and the star begins. Power comes first, of course. Blades of sunfire, war-shaping visions, a serenity that looks like divinity from the outside. But beneath that radiance lies something colder, the slow erosion of scale, as a shepherd or soldier begins to see people less as neighbours and more as pieces on an epical board. Around Targon, secret orders have grown like lichens on cliff face and temple stone, each one built on the quiet knowledge that if you can find the next host before the heavens do, you can tilt an age. Some watch the children who dream of falling stars and keep them safe, grooming them with prayers and discipline. Some resist, hiding such children in mountain villages, teaching them to mistrust the sudden pull of the sky. In a world as wide as Runeterra, a single ascension can redirect a century of war, and so these orders treat potential hosts as living fulcrums, never merely as sons or daughters. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A girl vanishes during a meteor shower and returns with eyes that do not quite recognize her brothers. A father walks down from the peak, wrapped in silver fire, and the village kneels while his wife realizes that the man she married has been thinned, overwritten, repurposed. Families call it an honor. Graves, when they come, are empty or marked only by star signs. Entire valleys learn to live in the wake of an absent godwalker, reshaped not by conquest but by the hole left behind. A chosen champion, a grand destiny, a shining hero who simply appears when the world needs them. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and you might miss the smaller conspiracies. The star scribe who whispers to a Noxian general that now is the time to march, because an aspect of war has foreseen a necessary slaughter. The Ionian order that adjusts its meditations after a Targonian vision hints which spirit must be appeased. The Damatian zealot who reads a prophecy copied from a Targon tablet and decides that mage hunting is not cruelty, but cosmic hygiene. These Targonian circles do not think in terms of empires, borders, or the next campaign season. They think in eras. Every host they guide or lose, every ascension they hasten or delay, is a move whose meaning may only ripen when your grandchildren are dust. The land will remember, even if you do not. And as we descend from the mountain and turn toward the ice once more, you should ask yourself, what happens when powers this patient meet something that does not dream in stars at all, but in hunger, buried far beneath the snow? Threads in the dark. How secret orders collide and collude. So let us linger just a moment longer in that buried hunger beneath the snow. Imagine that while a watcher's distant thought brushes the edge of the Freljord, a courier in Noxus signs for a sealed ledger, a Zornite chemist uncorks a vial, and a Targonian star scribe quietly adjusts a single line in a prophecy. In a world as wide as Runeterra, no shadow ever moves alone. Empires clash, blades meet, champions rise. Yet beneath each public war there is a second campaign waged by hands that never touch a banner. The Black Rose lends coin to a Piltover patron, who in turn invests in a Zornite workshop, where an unregistered experiment gnaws a hole in reality thin enough for a void whisper to slip through. No one in that chain believes they are opening a door. They think they are buying influence, buying progress, buying time. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A Kinku operative feels a wrongness in the wind above Zaun's chasms, a small tear where spirit and substance do not agree, and moves to mend it, never knowing that the cult they disperse was itself funded by a Noxian cabal, testing how far they can push the void without being devoured. Each order corrects for the other's excesses, like rival surgeons cutting at the same wound in the dark. Secrecy is not a veil, but a collision. When every brotherhood hides its hand, each plan is drawn against an imagined world rather than the true, tangled one. A Dalmatian circle hears rumours of Targonian rites in the mountains and tightens its mage hunts, not realising that the supposed Star Witch is a Lunari exile already fleeing a Solari Inquisition. One fear sharpens another. One hidden decree drives refugees into the arms of yet another clandestine power, and the land itself must absorb the impact. Yet there are moments when these buried agendas accidentally align, and the result looks from the outside almost like justice. A mage hunter cell in the Freljord burns out a village cult, believing they have purged simple heresy, never understanding that the chants on those lips were watcher names that should never be spoken. A Chem Baron's greed poisons an entire Zornite district, and the resulting spiritual outcry is so violent that a Targonian aspect descends, drawn not by worship, but by imbalance. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. A coded letter, a broken wardstone, a bribe left on a temple step. In each region, these groups adapt to one another's unseen weight, forming shadow ecosystems beneath the surface of politics. The Black Rose prunes Noxian rivals before they can threaten its long game. The Kinku quietly unmake the worst excesses of both Zed's order and foreign cults. Chem Barons learn which rituals to leave undisturbed because the last man who disrupted them never came back. Every duel has an echo. Every grave has neighbours. Every public catastrophe you recognize in the lore may be nothing more than the visible spark where two secret designs scraped against each other at last. And if this is how the land remembers its hidden wars, you must ask, what histories are still being written, right now, in rooms without windows, while the spirits hold their breath? Champions as broken pieces. Who really holds the board? So now you must look again at the figures you thought you knew, not as heroes framed in splash art, but as pieces half buried in someone else's design. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and watch how familiar champions blur into the hands that move them. Take Swain. You see a general, a raven, a man who outplayed a tyrant and seized an empire. But the Black Rose was already curling its petals around Noxus long before his first campaign, already installing and discarding rulers like candles burned down to the wick. LeBlanc whispered in Borum Darkwill's ear, then in others, then in masks of her own making, and when Swain rose with visions of a darker power, he did so in a hall whose foundations she had chosen, whose walls were lined with secrets she had priced. Is he the player, or simply the newest favoured piece on a board she has been arranging for centuries? Turn to Zed. Once a Kinku acolyte, sworn to a balance older than his own name, he breaks from his masters, builds the Order of Shadow, drenches Ionia's hidden war in blood. It feels like rebellion. It feels like a blade turned back on its teacher. Yet both orders spring from the same root teaching, the same forgotten master, the same spiritual geometry etched into shrines and skin. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Zed's defiance never leaves the circle drawn for him by dead men and older spirits. Silas shatters Demasia's mage hunters. Chains flashing, prisons collapsing, the city's white stone finally stained. A prisoner rises, an oppressed class ignites, a kingdom burns. But the anti-magic edicts he hates were drafted in back rooms by nameless councillors and veiled patrons, people who never carried a blade but carved the law as surely as steel. His uprising is a mirror held to their fear. His war is still their architecture. In a world as wide as Runeterra, even those who flee the pattern may already be woven into it. Kassadin descends toward the void to hunt a prophet, yet the cults that opened those first rifts were themselves guided by whispers from watchers who learned to speak through dreams. A soldier follows orders that were edited 3 times by a hidden cabal. A Zornite scientist pushes chemtech forward on coin, laundered through chem barons and pilt-over patrons who will never see the laboratory. A prophet in Shurima hears the voice of a god, not knowing that the vision was curated, trimmed and fed through relics touched by ancient star scribes. Champions stand at the centre of your screen. Their names title the stories. Their blades, their wind, their choices seem to carve the land itself. Yet how many of those choices were narrowed long before birth? Corridors of fate built by secret orders, by black roses, by shadowed brothers of forgotten creeds. The horror here is quiet. It is the realization that even the most powerful may be nothing more than rearranged pieces on a board whose edges they have never seen. And if some of them, just once, glimpse that unseen edge and try to step beyond it, what do the hands in the dark do then? The ethics of the invisible. Can secret guardians be good? So you sit with that question, held between finger and flame, and you realize there is another the hands in the dark always ask themselves. Are we not the heroes here? Welcome, Summoner. In a world as wide as Runeterra, few monsters ever look into a mirror and see a monster. They see a guardian, a surgeon, a necessary wound. The Kinko speak of preserving balance, of walking between spirit and flesh, so the land does not tear itself apart. Noxian mage hunters and Demasian circles swear they only chain magic so their nations do not burn. Chem barons in Zorn call their poisons progress, their slums laboratories for a brighter age. Targonian star scribes and radiant orders murmur of destiny, of constellations that demand a certain blood at a certain hour. On parchment, it sounds almost noble. In the quiet of their sanctums, it may even feel true. Yet when you step outside the candlelight and into the fields their choices have touched, the shapes change. A Kinku decree to preserve equilibrium can mean a village erased from maps and memory, its spirits dispersed like smoke because its existence tilted some unseen scale. A Chem Baron's experiment to refine shimmer becomes an entire district-breathing addiction. Parents selling tomorrow for one more glittering breath tonight. The Black Rose edits a single line in Noxian history, and generations grow up saluting a war that never truly happened, dying for a story written in a woman's private script. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. A Demasian mage hunter justifies one more disappearance so that the kingdom may sleep unafraid, and a child grows up never knowing why her brother did not come home. A Targonian acolyte reads the stars and decides that this shepherd, not that king, must ascend, and so a life is broken on an altar in the name of a pattern only a handful can read. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and you might almost believe these are regrettable but necessary sacrifices. So you are led to the oldest defense of all, perhaps a necessary evil. Perhaps without the Kinku, spirit wars would rip Ionia apart. Perhaps without LeBlanc's careful pruning, Noxus would have shattered into a dozen genocidal warlords. Perhaps without Chem Barons, Zorn would stagnate and rot instead of clawing toward invention. Yet how often do these guardians prevent catastrophe? And how often do they cultivate it? Pruning and watering crises like a poisonous garden, they alone know how to tend. There is another problem, sharper than any argument about outcomes. None of this is asked of those who pay the price. A fisherman whose bay is flooded with toxic runoff never consented to be a variable in a Chem Baron's theorem. An Ionian family, cut down in a shadow war between Kinku and their rivals, never agreed that balance mattered more than their next harvest. A village in the Freljord swallowed by a Watcher cult's failed summoning was never told its blizzard was being engineered from beneath. Secret orders answer only to themselves. They write the charges, pass the sentence, swing the blade, and then archive the memory in a vault no common hand will ever open. The noble cabal, the hidden protectors who saved the world 3 times in silence. Perhaps that is even true. Perhaps the Black Rose prevented a war that would have drowned continents. Perhaps a Targonian conclave sealed a star-born horror your eyes could not survive. Both things can stand together, like brothers who will never quite forgive each other. Some secret hands have saved lives, wars, even worlds. Their interventions have stitched shut wounds that, left alone, might have bled Runeterra dry. And yet, their methods carve deep, unhealed scars into the body and memory of the land. Villages that never existed, names that were never spoken, futures stolen before they could be chosen. Every unseen rescue leaves an unseen grave. Every hidden mercy casts a hidden shadow. So you are left with a double vision that does not resolve. Guardians and butchers, archivists and arsonists, all wearing the same hood. The question is not only what they prevent, but what they permit themselves to do in the dark. And if the next catastrophe is already being shaped in some locked chamber tonight under the careful hands of those who promise they alone can stop it, what will they decide you are worth? When secrets rot, collapse, corruption, and unintended revelations. So let us stay in that locked chamber a little longer and listen for the sound of wood beginning to rot beneath the varnish. Power does not simply stand, it sags, it warps, it grows soft in the dark. The horror here is quiet, like a blade left sheathed too long, spots of rust blooming where no one bothers to look. In Noxus, the Black Rose is already fraying at the edges. LeBlanc's ageless masks breed jealous apprentices, each certain the Cabal's grand design should bend toward their private vendettas, their preferred generals, their favoured wars. Factions turn inward, rewriting even their own rewritten history, until brothers in conspiracy no longer recognise which memory was real. When Swain tears away Darkwill's regime, he does more than stage a coup. He drags a tangle of half-seen sigils and secret decrees into torchlight, and for a moment you glimpse how many hands were on the steering wheel and how many of them were trembling. Ionia is not spared this slow decay. Orders that claim to speak for the spirit of the land split like old bamboo under too much strain. The Kinku cling to balance, the Order of Shadow to victory, other cloistered sects to their own austere visions of purity. And within each circle, schisms form over what the war demanded, over whose dead are honoured and whose are forgotten. A monastery, a code, a single betrayal. Yet behind those familiar silhouettes, lesser names argue over scrolls and assassinations, over whether mercy is treason, until the oath itself begins to stink of fear. In Zon, chem barons once toasting shared dominion over the depths now lace each other's drinks with new toxins, each disaster an experiment, each rival district a laboratory. Piltover pretends its hands are clean, until a bridge collapses under chem-corroded bolts or a plume of green fire climbs the sky, and suddenly the unofficial arrangements are written on every coughing lung. Void cults, too, cannot keep their devotion pure. They splinter over which whisper in the dark is the true God, which vision of unmaking is most holy, and so they compete in atrocities like priests arguing over liturgy. Secrecy accelerates this corruption because there is no air, no wind, no outside gaze to scour the mould. Missions become altars to personal obsession. Without scrutiny, a leader's paranoia passes for prudence, a collector's hunger for forbidden lore masquerades as necessary sacrifice. Let the details move past you like drifting ash. One forged report in Demacia to justify a mage's disappearance, one hidden ledger in Shurima funding Sun Disk loyalists, one erased prophecy in Targon's star scribes. Each is small. Together, they tilt the whole sky. And when such hidden scaffolding finally gives way, the collapse does not stay in the cellar. Swain's revelations send Noxian legions stumbling as they realize how many campaigns were stage theatre. Silas rips Demacia's hypocrisy into the open, and the kingdom's bright walls ring not with hymns, but with the sound of chains breaking and new hatreds being born. Zonite catastrophes force Piltover to see its reflection in the polluted water, and trade routes, laws, even family alliances lurch as if the land itself had shifted. Allow the night to grow a little deeper, because in a world as wide as Runeterra, these are not isolated failures. They are symptoms of an age of revelation, when centuries of sealed decisions rise like corpses in a flooded crypt. No empire, No order, no hidden brotherhood is prepared for the full truth of what it has done to survive. The question that waits for you in the next turning of this story is simple and merciless. When every mask finally cracks, what remains of the face beneath? You, the summoner. Your place in Runeterra's shadow. Games. When every mask cracks, you expect only ruined faces beneath. Torn emblems, shattered orders, but allow the night to grow a little deeper and you will find there is still one presence wearing its veil perfectly, untouched by any inquisition or coup. That presence is you, summoner. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you stand in no court, swear to no empire, bleed for no banner, and yet, with a single idle gesture, you pull blades and spirits, emperors and exiles, onto a square of haunted ground and tell them to reenact their wars for you. 5 against 5, towers and minions, victory and defeat. But every champion you call arrives trailing the weight of a hidden archive of choices you were never forced to read. You drag a Noxian general into the light, his mind once touched by the Black Rose, whose ageless mistress has rewritten empires as if they were drafts of a letter. You bind him to fight beside or against an Ionian assassin raised in the Kinku's quiet temples or twisted by the Order of Shadow's secret war. You place a Chemtech butcher from Zon's Chem Barons opposite a Damatian mage hunter whose family dines with clandestine inquisitors. On the surface, it is only a match. Underneath, it is a ritual. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Each game is a controlled reenactment of secret conflicts that once tore villages, laboratories and shrines apart. The Black Rose's experiments with Noxian succession. The Kinku's hidden failures to hold the balance. Void cults whispering to the watchers beneath Freljord's ice. On the Rift, all of this is flattened into lanes and objectives, as if the land itself has been carved into a diagram for you to contemplate without ever feeling the blood that soaked its first design. Yet you choose. You choose which war to remember, which order to empower, which myth to rehearse until it feels inevitable. When you favour the rose-marked illusionist over the nameless soldier, you feed one shadowed narrative and starve another. When you dress an Ionian blade in festival silks rather than mourning robes, you decide whether her story is tragedy, farce, or celebration. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and you might forget that every cosmetic, every faction allegiance is a tiny vote in an unseen election of meaning. And above all of them, above Black Rose and Chem Baron, above Kinku Acolyte and Watcher Zealot, there is you. Not a citizen of any province, but an eye beyond the skybox, a hand that never ages. Are you an archivist, preserving possibilities? A tormentor, forcing the same brothers to cross blades again and again for your late-night comfort? Or something older, using this world as a lens to study war, choice and spirit from a place where consequence cannot reach you? If the secret organizations of Runeterra ever discover that their careful schemes are being shuffled, replayed and inverted by an unseen class of beings beyond their stars, what, exactly, do you think they will do to reach back? Maps, masks and missing pages. How much of Runeterra is a lie? The thought you have just entertained that the schemers of Runeterra might look up and notice you looking down leads to a darker one. If they can reach for you, how long have they been reaching for their own pasts, their own maps, their own names, reshaping them until even the land forgets what truly happened? Noxus, born from war and iron, rising on merit and strength. Yet the Black Rose predates the Empire's proud banners, its thorns sunk into the first chronicles, pruning lines, grafting legends, wearing emperors like masks. LeBlanc has been a dozen founders and advisors and saviours at once, her spirit flickering through the centuries so that when you read of Borum Darkwill's rise and fall, you're reading a performance twice edited, once by her hand and once by those who survived her. In Ionia, where wind and spirit are said to remember every oath, the Kinku once promised balance. Then Zed split from their teachings, turning guardians into shadows. To preserve a fragile harmony, how many inconvenient pupils, failed rituals, and ill-omened visions were quietly erased from temple scrolls? A missing novice here, a redacted battle there, and suddenly war seems inevitable rather than chosen. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Demacia sings of purity and justice, yet its most diligent historians are mage hunters with quills. Records of sympathetic sorcerers vanish, leaving only tales of monsters and traitors. Shurima remembers a golden age through sun disk loyalists who survived, not through the nameless who bled beneath ascended feet. Targan's star scribes keep meticulous charts of prophecy, but only the prophecies that serve the current summit. The others are allowed to fade, like constellations no longer deemed useful to name. In a world as wide as Runeterra, what does it mean to know anything at all, when every archive is a battlefield and every chronicler serves a patron? Even here, outside the fiction, you have watched the official lore bend and shift. Empires rewritten, brothers reborn with new motives, entire wars retconned into whispers. Let the details move past you like drifting ash and you will miss the pattern. But if you look closely, the metatext becomes a mirror. The same way a Noxian scribe revises an old campaign, a modern update quietly replaces one truth with another. So you are left with a discipline that feels almost like prayer, permanent skepticism. Every official story is only one version, curated by a cabal, a council, a writer's room, a hidden order of spirit watchers. The gaps, the silences, the contradictions, that is where the secret organizations leave their fingerprints in what they refuse to say. Return now to the map from our opening scene. At first it seemed clean. Borders sharp, trade routes sure, war fronts marked in tidy ink. Look again. Tilt it toward the lamp. Beneath Demacia's bright outline, faint older lines suggest a kingdom that no longer exists. Under Noxus, a rose sigil has been scraped away, its impression still bruising the parchment. Shurima's desert hides ghost rivers. Targan's peak is drawn 3 times, each summit slightly shifted, as though the mountain itself keeps moving. This is not a map. It is a palimpsest, a battlefield of revisions. The land has been written over so often that you can see the scars. And in those half-erased borders and smudged notes, there are stories we still do not have. Choices we were never meant to witness, wars that were decided before the first line was drawn. A world of quiet wars, weaving the threads together. So when you step back from that palimpsest of borders and erased names, you begin to see the hands that keep rewriting it. In a world as wide as Runeterra, maps do not change themselves. They are bent, they are persuaded, they are threatened in the dark. Consider Noxus, marching legions, brutal meritocracy, an empire of visible blades. Yet behind its generals moves the Black Rose, an old patient cabal that survives by refusing to die, wearing emperors like masks and centuries like a single unbroken night. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. LeBlanc has been advisor, lover, traitor, and savior in 100 guises, and Noxians remember none of it clearly. Across the sea, Piltover and Zorn glitter and rot as 2 faces of the same coin. Official histories speak of trade, invention, progress, yet the Chem Barons and their allied cabals write a second ledger beneath the first, one inked in addiction, debt, and bodies. Entire districts move when they pull a single financial thread. War can begin with a tariff. A rebellion can end with a shipment that never arrives. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and you might miss the simple cruelty. A few men and women deciding who breathes clean air and who chokes below. Ionia, for all its talk of balance, shelters its own invisible hierarchies. The Kinko, the Order of Shadow, the scattered spiritual circles that claim to listen to the land. Each believes it alone hears the true voice of the spirit world. One guards the old ways. One wields forbidden techniques. One whispers that compromise is just cowardice with incense. Their conflict is not always open war. Sometimes it is a child trained as a weapon, a shrine quietly defiled, a single assassination that tilts a province towards slaughter. Beyond them, stranger congregations kneel. Void cults in forgotten catacombs, watcher worshippers under Freljord ice, Shuriman loyalists tracing the sun disk on sand, Demacian mage hunters meeting in lamplit halls, Targonian star scribes reading omens no one else may see, political manipulation, economic exploitation, metaphysical censorship, cosmic indifference, apocalyptic nihilism, different flavors of the same hunger to decide which memories survive, which futures are even possible. Allow the night to grow a little deeper and a pattern emerges. Each of these orders justifies its secrecy with the same quiet argument. The world is too fragile, the masses too fearful, chaos too near. So they will sacrifice the many for the few, or the few for the many, certain that only they grasp the true shape of the land and the wars still sleeping beneath it. And so the battles you watch, the sieges, the duels, the brothers crossing blades over honour and shame, become foam on the surface of older currents. To live here as champion or citizen or summoner is to walk through stories written by unseen hands, wondering, with every choice, whose script you are truly following. Standing in the archive, what you carry out of the dark. So you find yourself back where we began, though you have walked through half a world of shadows to arrive. The lamp in the Noxian archive still burns low. Dust still turns in the air like slow grey snow, each mote crossing the beam as if it were a spirit reconsidering its path. Maps lie open on the table, borders scored and rescored, and along the shelves leather spines gleam like rows of patient, watching eyes. In a world as wide as Runeterra, this room is only one chamber among thousands, yet it feels as though the land itself has leaned in to listen. You stand between shelves that have swallowed the Black Rose's revisions of history, Chem Baron ledgers from Zorn that never saw a court, quiet records of Kinku decrees and Order of Shadow purges that never reached a shrine. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work, and the weight you feel now is not just Noxus, but every hidden hand you have glimpsed. Before you, one volume lies open, its forbidden script still breathing the names of wars decided before the first trumpet sounded. You have seen LeBlanc's masks, the Chem Baron's contracts, the Star Scribe's calculations scratched in the margins of prophecy. Yet as your fingers close the cover, the parchment sighs, and you understand that you are not ending anything. Stories like these do not require your eyes to continue. They walk on without you, down corridors of power and fear, and ignorance once lost is not a refuge you can reclaim. Allow the night to grow a little deeper in this archive. Listen to what knowledge has cost. Every region you have crossed in thought, the gilded towers of Piltover, the sunburnt stones of Shurima, the frostbitten altars of Freljord, glitters in memory, yet now each beauty is underwritten by invisible cruelties. A mage hunter's erased victim beneath Demasia's pure banners, a sacrificed village beneath a watcher cult's brief ecstasy, a nameless apprentice consumed so that a single hextech breakthrough could shine. Every act of heroism you admire may stand precarious on someone else's unmarked grave. So where does that leave you, a single observer in this dim room, smaller than any empire, softer than any war machine? You are not a Black Rose matron, nor a Chem Baron, nor a spirit bound to a shrine. You are only a witness. Yet awareness is its own thin weapon. To see the pattern of hands behind the curtain is to make it harder for them to move unquestioned, to turn every rumour, every decree, every sudden war into a question rather than a command. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, but do not let them vanish. The lamp guttering beside you throws the shelves into longer, sharper angles. Nothing roars, nothing lunges. The true monsters of this world rarely need to. They sign, they whisper, they wait, trusting that no one will ever read the right page in the right order. You have for a moment, and the page has looked back. When you step out of this archive and into the wider night of Runeterra, you will carry no relic, no blade, no spell, only the quiet, unsettling knowledge that the next war, the next fallen champion, the next pair of brothers crossing in the dark may already be written, somewhere by hands you will never see. Your turn in the shadows, choosing which secrets to follow. So now you stand in the doorway of this archive, one foot in the lamplight and one already testing the dark beyond, and the shelves you have passed seem to lean toward you, as if reluctant to let you go. You have seen masks, sigils, half-burned letters, the faint fingerprints of hands you will never meet. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. In a world as wide as Runeterra, you cannot open every door at once. You must choose. If you turned back, which threshold would you cross again with open eyes? The perfumed salons of Noxus, where the Black Rose rewrites empires over whispered toasts, the rusted catwalks and hidden labs of Zon, where Kim Barons buy souls with vapor and coin, the Ionian shrines where Kinku and shadow disciples argue over whose spirit the land should truly obey. Would you descend once more into the Demacian cellars where mage hunters keep their private ledgers, into Shuriman tombs where sun disk loyalists polish dead titles, into Targonian observatories where star scribes trace destinies in cold light, or into void-touched caverns where cults kneel to watchers that have never stopped listening? You think you know this story, do you not, because you have seen these regions on the Rift, bright and stylized and loud. Yet here, beneath the noise, every banner casts a second, longer shadow. Allow the night to grow a little deeper and ask yourself, not as a distant reader of lore, but as someone who has walked these aisles, which of these organizations unsettles you most, and why? Which feels most terrifying in its methods, most justified in its cause, most profoundly misunderstood? Does the Black Rose already have petals pressed quietly into Piltover ledgers and Zornite contracts? Are the Kinku and the Order of Shadow truly enemies, or two halves of one broken design, still circling the same wound? When you lock in a champion, how many of them are still puppets who have not yet seen the strings? A Noxian general whose victories were purchased decades before he was born, a Zornite prodigy whose research follows a path laid out by unseen patrons, an Ionian assassin who thinks she serves balance while the spirits flinch at her passing. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, and notice which ember catches. If you wish, you can leave a trace here. Name the door you would have us open wider, the cabal or order whose ledgers you want unsealed, the region whose polite myths you are ready to see cracked. This is only one chapter in Runeterra After Dark. There are still circles we have not named, pacts we have only brushed in passing, entire wars decided in catacombs and observatories while the surface world slept. In a moment, the lamp in this archive will be extinguished, and you will step back into the louder, brighter war of the game, blades flashing, spirits silent, brothers and strangers alike clashing beneath indifferent stars. Yet you will know now that every cheerful match is framed by unseen hands, that somewhere, far from the rift, someone is already tallying the cost of your next victory. And as the light dies behind you, another door in the dark begins, very softly, to open. After the echoes, final silence and the weight of knowing. So listen, just for a moment longer before that other door finishes opening. The war drums you left behind on the rift are still beating, but now they are distant, muffled, as if heard through stone and water, each strike softer than the last until it is more memory than sound. The horror here is quiet, like a blade sliding back into its sheath after it has already done its work. Somewhere behind you, the clash of champions becomes a low, indistinct roar. Before you, in this hidden archive of names and sigils, the loudest sound is only the rustle of pages settling in the dark, a slow exhale of parchment and dust as the great book of secret orders closes itself by degrees. You can almost taste it now, the faint metallic tang of old ink, the ghost of steel and chem and dried blood woven into the bindings, the way the air itself seems stained by every oath whispered here, by every bargain the land was never meant to hear. Let the details move past you like drifting ash, not gone, not forgiven, only choosing a quieter orbit around the edges of your thoughts. In a world as wide as Runeterra, the stories that shape empires rarely shout their own names. The Black Rose does not need to. The Chem Barons of Zon do not. The Kinku, the Order of Shadow, the Star Scribes and Sun Disk faithful, and those who kneel to the void beneath frozen cathedrals of ice. Each leaves only a smudge on the record, a missing line, a war that began too early or ended too late. That wars are decided by the brightest blades, that history belongs to the loud, the crowned, the ones whose statues catch the morning light. Yet you have walked the corridors behind the marble now, and you have seen that in Runeterra, the loudest stories are often written by the quietest hands. No revelation waits here to comfort you. No final ledger balances the scales. Those hands are still moving, even now, in rooms without windows, in laboratories that never see the sun, in shrines where only the spirit and the assassin bear witness. They are planning, adjusting, erasing, as indifferent to your sleep as to the cries of the battlefield. So we will not promise safety. We will not swear that knowing is a shield. We will only leave you with this. Once you have peered behind the curtain, every distant drum sounds like a signal. Every closed door like a throat clearing before the next command. Sleep lightly, summoner. The archive is not destroyed, it is only shelved. Its bindings will creak open again when curiosity calls your hand back to the spine, when the night is quiet enough that you can hear the pages breathing. Until then, walk your wars and tell your tales, knowing that somewhere, out beyond the lantern light, the secrets you have learned are still listening for you.